there was this one question of like, hey, do you think partners are becoming more or less effective as a channel in reaching your audience? And if you, break out just the respondents who are not directly associated with partnerships, over 80% of them said like, yes, we think this is actually a more effective channel. And in fact, something like a full third of them, like 33.9%, said it was a significantly more effective channel for them.
Our sponsor is Partner Insight, your AI co-pilot to grow your partnerships 3x faster. Onboard and collaborate with partners from one shared platform. Seamlessly exchange and track deals, content, and data. Use AI to automate engagements, track progress, create reports, or answer frequent partner questions. Try Partner Insight for free.
Today I'm excited to have back in our show Scott Brinker, famous Chief Martech, who's been father of marketing technology, and he's been mapping marketing ecosystem for more than a decade. Scott is also VP of Partner Ecosystem in HubSpot, the company that doesn't need introduction. It's leading marketing and sales automation software with 1.7 billion in revenue. Not everyone knows that 43% of this revenue is coming from partners, and the company also builds credible app ecosystem with marketplace of 1,300 apps. And it couldn't be a better moment for this conversation because HubSpot, together with Partnership Leaders and Pavilion, just published a new research on the state of partner-led growth, where they asked marketing and sales leaders on the impact that partnership have in their organizations. Second reason why I think it's interesting to have Scott in today is because he is leading app marketplace and HubSpot, and cloud marketplaces like hyperscalers and HubSpot and Atlassian are becoming one of the channel of go-to-market for many SaaS companies today. So I look forward to chatting with Scott about this trend. And finally, we are living in this era of AI explosion, and it couldn't be a better person to ask about how software landscape will change than Scott Brinker. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation. If you do, please give us a thumbs up and comment below. So Scott, great to have you back. I've been waiting for this conversation for almost like a year. So great to have you back.
Oh yeah, no, it's great to be back with you, Roman.
First of all, thank you so much for leading marketing technology landscape, or continue leading marketing technology landscape, I should say. And now not only you helping to coin the term MarTech, now you are venturing into helping to coin partner-led growth as well. So my first question, you recently published a great report on the state of partner-led growth in collaboration with Partnership Leaders and Pavilion, two great communities for partnership and sales leaders. And I want to ask you, what was the question behind the question? Why you decided to look into this area?
Well, last year in collaboration with Partnership Leaders and Canalist Jay McBain, we had done a study around partner programs and operations and how they have been evolving, what's working, what's not working, where are the challenges, where are the growth, which was fascinating. It actually, we got a bunch of data that to date hadn't really been assembled, in a previous study. But it was all very inward looking on like, okay, this is what the partnership organization thinks about what it's doing and where its opportunities are. The question that came out of that was, okay, well, we know what partnerships people think about partnerships. What does the rest of the revenue organization think about partnerships? Where does marketing and sales leaders, particularly those who aren't directly associated with partnerships, what is their opinion of, the impact of, partner-led growth? Where do they see performance boost? Where do they see challenges still? So that was what really motivated us. What do the rest of the people in the revenue organization think about partnerships as a channel?
That's a super important question. And I think you've done a really good job of going into nitty-gritty details, like looking into different type of revenue influence and different type of deal attach, like how they can convert and so on. But sort of on a high level, what is your sort of biggest revelation or insight or things that you wouldn't expect in this report?
Not entirely sure that I had a set of expectations, but what I was actually pleasantly surprised by was just how effective sales and marketing leaders who aren't in partnerships believe partnerships is as a channel. I mean, sort of me, the big takeaway, like there's a whole bunch of like, more specific data, but there was this one question of like, hey, do you think partners are becoming more or less effective as a channel in reaching your audience? And if you, break out the just the respondents who are not directly associated with partnerships, over 80% of them said like, yes, we think this is actually a more effective channel. And in fact, something like a full third of them, like 33.9%, said it was a significantly more effective channel for them. And so to me, that's really exciting because, I mean, again, I think at some level, partnerships have been around for ages, but it does feel like these past couple years, we've seen a lot of momentum and acceleration in companies thinking about, their ecosystems in broader terms and really starting to find ways to like lean into that as a growth channel. But still, that's actually leaning into that and developing that is a pretty new motion for a lot of companies. And anytime you're like bringing new things to a company, you certainly expect to, have skepticism of like, all right, is this really where we should be investing? And so I think to have some of the data from the skeptics saying that like, yeah, actually, we do think this is a great place to invest in. That was really encouraging.
You've been actually leading HubSpot's platform ecosystem over the last 5 years, I should say. And I think it would be interesting to hear your own take on this. Like, why do you think this shift is happening? And where do you see on the ground? Because I think you are doing great analysis of the entire tech ecosystem through marketing lens. And I think you have like a unique insight on how the entire space is evolving.
Yeah, and I should clarify, like, so ecosystem at HubSpot is actually quite large. We have a leader who runs what you would think of as mostly our channel ecosystem, all of our services and solutions providers. And then my role has been leading more of the technology ecosystem of companies who build apps or integrate their apps with HubSpot. So I can talk a little bit about both, but like the latter is the one where, yes, my expertise perhaps is a little bit more credible. I think there's two factors here. So, and they're kind of two variations of the same thing. One is just from the technology perspective, oh my goodness, like there's just been an explosion of technology. I mean, I still remember, I've got some gray hair here, the days when like if you were going to do a market map, for an industry, you'd be like, oh yeah, here are the 2 or 3 dozen vendors, who serve marketing tech or sales tech or HR tech, as part of like just a whole series of factors, of what happened as software moved into the cloud, and there's all this incredibly cheap infrastructure, and we have all this amazing open source foundations on which people build in. I mean, all these factors have contributed to there being just an absolute explosion of software in every single category. I mean, the one I've tracked, for marketing technology, right? It went from like 150 vendors in 2011 to we just published a landscape last month that it was like over 11,000 now. And so all this innovation, I mean, it's exciting at one level, but right, if you're a buyer, if you're like a marketing leader in MarTech, for instance, this becomes a mixed bag because on one hand you're like, well, yeah, there's all these interesting innovations happening out there, but holy crap, how do I like get these things, to integrate together? Like, how do I get things like, I don't want to be in the integration business. I want to be in the marketing business, And so I think that naturally it becomes a motivation for the technology vendors to develop partnerships and ecosystem strategies to say like, listen, let's figure out how to work together, between us because it's going to benefit our mutual customers. So that's from the tech side. And then if you think about it from the go-to-market side, I mean, again, it's kind of a variation of the same thing is thank you, internet, for connecting the entire world and allowing anyone to publish anything, anywhere, anytime, which they now do. I mean, the noise in the marketplace is thundering. It's one of the hardest challenges for marketing and sales leaders is just penetrating, that noise to reach their audience. And so again, if there's some data in this report we did, when you're looking for channels to reach your audience and break through, things like, content marketing and social media, I mean, yes, you need to do those, but that's where you're facing the greatest noise, like the odds are really stacked against you. Where people tend to, consistently pay more attention is when they're getting connected through a trusted source. Now, that trusted source might be someone in their professional network, like their peers that they know. Hey, Joe, have you gone through this? Who would you recommend? That's still by far, word of mouth, the most valuable, lead source in the world. But the second most valuable is to say, like, oh, well, if they have either agencies they're working with or consultancies or other service providers, other folks that they've developed a relationship with that they've come to trust. If those companies, are in a position to say, oh, well, if you're interested in, say in HubSpot, like a CRM platform, you should talk to HubSpot. We work with them and we think they're great, and here's how we work with them. That becomes just an incredible way to like break through, yeah, just that thundering noise that we have, in the broader marketing and sales landscape.
It's great that people like you actually share this message and do these reports like this, because I think a lot of people intuitively understand it, but they just don't see evidence and they don't see tangible results. And I think what is great about this survey that you and reports that you published is that it identified like two distinct groups, in my opinion, right? And one of the groups of partners of marketing and sales leaders who work with partners, and so they kind of understand partnership. They get partnership more, seems to be. And then the second one, which doesn't work with partners, they still believe that partners are important, but they put importance much lower, and they feel it's kind of a little bit less exciting about partnerships. So you call this perception gap, I should say, and I see that from this report, comparing with your own performance, like HubSpot, I mean, as a company. So people, for example, feel that partners influence close to 10, maybe 25% of revenue sometimes, sort of but the company like yours is getting 43% of revenue through partners, which is incredible, at scale. So like, why do you think is this perception gap?
Yeah, and I was actually really happy with the survey that we segmented the responses based on those who are affiliated or working with partners already and those who aren't, because again, I think it's just natural, like the work you do every day that you've committed your career to, you know, uh, you're biased, right? I mean, so I would expect, like people who are already engaged in partnerships to probably be a little bit more optimistic in their view about, the influence and impact of partners. Not to say that they're wrong, but, they're biased, versus like, yeah, for me, the data from the sales and marketing leaders who aren't, primarily like with partnerships or owning partnerships or directly involved with it, to me, that feels like it's a little bit more of an objective point of view. They're the ones who have more reason to be skeptical. And you're right, you do see in the data in this report, when you compare the two segments, the ones affiliated with partners tend to, think more highly, of that channel and different tactics within it than those who aren't. And it's interesting to look like, where do they differ and by how much do they differ from a perception perspective. But again, like if you just get rid of the partnership data and you just look at the data from non-partnership leaders, even that was like remarkably positive of like, yeah, no, actually, we do think this is, a more valuable channel. Maybe not as enthusiastically, as our friends who actually are running partnerships, bless them. But yes, no, we recognize this in both co-marketing opportunities and then also from a sales perspective. Where are we getting the lead sourced from? Who's influencing them? What are the greatest factors, in determining the close rate, we're going to have for a deal that comes to us.
From your own experience, do you see any attributes that would differentiate companies who get partnership versus companies who don't get partnership? Is it like, or is it completely bespoke based on the industry and like history and stuff like that?
It would be hard for me to generalize that, because I think across industries you see companies that are, perhaps ahead of the curve, and thinking about partnerships. And part of it is also when you talk about partnerships, again, there's kind of a long history around pure channel partnerships. Like, oh yeah, we have pure resellers for this. It's, and the way in which they're measured is purely by the revenue of transactions being run by those partners. And not to, object to that. That is certainly a valid dimension of this. But I think one of the reasons this concept of a more ecosystem-wide view, is gaining traction is like a partner who actually does the sale transaction for you is important. But very often, particularly in B2B and in more complex sales, like they're often only one of many partners in your ecosystem who have some sort of influence or impact, like the other tech vendors that customer works with. Maybe they have one service provider that they're actually getting the implementation from, but they might have other consultants, management consultants. They might have an agency doing marketing work for them. And the degree to which a company is able to start to look at that holistically and orchestrate these different kinds of partners and their combined influence, I think that can dramatically accelerate the impact they get. But again, I recognize that this is still a relatively new playbook to think of it in that scale. And so I think even across industries, you've got some companies ahead of the curve on that playbook, but a lot that, this is still new to them.
It's also like a new playbook, but also it's a little bit of the playbook is changing. So like typically ecosystems is a feature of a more mature companies, right? And then now a little bit kind of less companies who are earlier in their journey start to think about ecosystem earlier, but still you need to be at a certain level to do that properly.
I agree with you. Like having your own ecosystem as you scale becomes, there is a certain critical mass you often need to be able to serve as a center of gravity for that. That being said, what I do think it's very exciting from the other side, which as a startup or a new company, in many ways, that's the most daunting moment in your life cycle is, you're just trying to get off the ground, get momentum, product market fit. If you're just trying to go out there in the wide open world, again, it goes back to that noise. It's just really, really hard to break through versus like if you look for ecosystems where you can plug in, this really becomes a phenomenal way for smaller companies to focus in on a target audience, have a set of channels by which they can reach them. So anyways, I'd say there's an ecosystem strategy of playing in other people's ecosystems, which can be really effective, as well as, a company running your own ecosystem.
You'll touch and actually look deeper into your ecosystem in a second, because you built a great app store in HubSpot, right? Which is like 1,300 apps today. But let's touch a few other things sort of in the report. One of the things that struck me is that the majority of people think that partnerships are worthwhile investing in, and I frankly didn't expect this to be the case, because overwhelmingly everyone supportive of all partners, and also close to 90% of sales leaders said that their sales teams actually collaborate with partners on closing deals, and deals are closing faster. And sort of stuff like that. If it is so clear that the results could be so compelling, what do you think is sort of the future of partnerships, and what are the things that we might see in the next couple of years?
This is kind of like as an evolving business model. Some of the data I was just reading from McKinsey, who likes to look at these things from a super macroeconomic level. They believe by 2030, a good third of the world's economy, we're talking $100 trillion, is going to be through integrated partner networks. Just because of the interdependency. Part of it is there are more interdependencies because the nature of digital technologies is it's just making it easier to connect things together. But part of it is also just we're recognizing that it is actually more of a network world that, before it was even harder to see that, but even some of the analytical technologies as we're getting better with, customer relationship management data, customer, data of different kinds. We're starting to be able to see these patterns, with things like second party data and the technologies to support leverage emerging second party that we're starting to come up with like, oh, there's actual programmatic ways, systematic ways, that we can start to lean into, these ecosystem sales and marketing motions. So I do think it's evolving very rapidly, but I mean, again, it's like one of these things that anything that's new, it takes time to distribute itself, across the world. So, yeah, I think it's easily going to be a good 10 years here of, evolution, of partnerships. But I think we're definitely at a point where it's interesting of people both, thinking about partnerships more than just that immediate transactional channel, and also now starting to leverage more technology to be able to, yeah, actually get our arms around a broader ecosystem that before was, I mean, even just the operational components, of executing it, were probably enough of a barrier to, hold back a lot of folks.
Your report mentioned that sales leaders feel that partner influence deals are closing almost like sometimes 50% faster, which is great. But I agree with you that value of partnership goes way beyond transactional kind of deals. So going back to like what your day-to-day role in HubSpot, you started around 2017 when the company had like a small app store which has close to 100 apps. And over the last 5 years, you built incredible ecosystem which already has 1,300 apps. And I should say that it's very difficult to actually take it from like 100 to scale, because later the journey is becoming kind of more exponential. Like I published the case on Shopify, which shows like a rapid growth. So I'm curious, in building this tech partner ecosystem, app ecosystem, what was your insights over the last years?
And I mean, I think one thing to also just, to give credit where credit is due, partnership management, partnership programs, they can contribute to this. But at the end of the day, the fundamental thing that drives a technology ecosystem is the opportunity that's being presented to other partners. Like, what is the incentive, for them to invest in integrating with a platform, both from a technical perspective and, from a go-to-market perspective. And so the first and foremost thing there is actually what the addressable market is, And so I think two things that were really helpful over these past 5 years in HubSpot's ecosystem growth is, first of all, HubSpot's customer base grew significantly. It had been boy, I forget what the exact number was when I started, but don't hold me to this, but let's say it's like around 50, 60,000, and then like, yeah, today it's like nearly 180,000. So now you're talking like, oh well, if I integrate in with HubSpot, this is giving me access to a significantly larger set of customers. But the other thing is, HubSpot, the origin story was largely serving smaller businesses, because in many ways they were the ones who were like having the hardest time figuring out how to get all these different technologies together. So, HubSpot came in and tried to really simplify that for them, which is great. The company grew tremendously, in that segment, which is historically a difficult segment for software companies to like win in. So kudos to the company. But over the past 5 years, we've started to steadily go up market where, we really are engaging and servicing more and more mid-market companies. And the thing is, once you start to get into the mid-market, these are businesses that are larger, they're more complex. From a tech stack perspective, they have, many more other technologies that are part of how their business runs. The processes, like the specialization they want to do, the expertise they have in different departments, all this stuff expands. And as a result, it creates a tremendous opportunity for, okay, it's not just about the HubSpot solution, but it's about HubSpot and how it works with all of the other technologies in their tech stack. How does it work with, how do the service providers that they rely on, are they able to leverage this as well too? And that's a two-way street, right? I mean, this has always been, one of the fundamental things from tech partnerships that you see again and again is if you have two technologies and they integrate together for their mutual customers, both of them generally see a lift in customer dollar retention. That once customers get this stuff working together, it's a much more stable, installation. And certainly in the SaaS world, right? Like churn, customer retention. I mean, you could argue that is a far more important metric, than customer acquisition. Companies live and die, based on their churn rate, based on their customer dollar retention. And so when you start to get into this space where you're saying like, oh, well, if we do this and the partner does this, we both get a bump, in customer dollar retention. Okay, now you've got a really meaningful financial incentive for companies to invest in that. So all this is to say, like, yeah, I can't take credit, for this growth. I'd like to think I helped it from a program and partnership perspective, but it really is the core engine that, is the foundation on which, tech partnerships are inspired.
I agree, and but I think that you've done a great job, and I think so much in terms of like building HubSpot influence and also evangelizing HubSpot and building all this, helping to build partnerships and kind of build this ecosystem. I'm curious, as a go-to-market expert, or like I would like to say guru, but I don't want to to put too much pressure on you. But so. I see that a lot of companies now shifting sort of go-to-market motion towards what we discussed previously, sort of going into marketplaces, I should say, of companies like HubSpot or companies like AWS or Atlassian could be a good example, and so on. What is your view in terms of like this trend becoming one of the prominent way to go to market? Because I think you see the both sides, right? So you see the partner side who is like plugging into your ecosystem, and you see obviously the vendor side. How this trend is evolving from your opinion?
I think it's just accelerating, and again, this does connect back to your earlier question. It's like, okay, well, people are now seeing higher performance, through their ecosystem and partner related plays. What would you expect them to do? They'd be like, well, how can we do more of this? And so I think the appetite is there for it, because the economics, prove it out. Again, I suspect the barriers are becoming less and less do we believe this will be effective, and more just like, okay, as you start to scale this up, again, it's like a set of new motions. Like, again, if you're plugging into, like these cloud marketplaces as a distribution channel, this is a net new thing. How does that impact the way, your marketing and sales team, works? How are they measured? How's your quota system? Yeah, I mean, it's just like, operationally, embedding ecosystem and partner motions into sales and marketing. Like, it's not trivial. In fact, we had one of the things in this report was, we'd asked a series of questions about co-marketing campaigns in particular. It was like on a different criteria, like, engagement, conversion rates, quality of the leads, the lifetime value of the leads that you get through it. And it was really great to see that, across all of those criteria, the feedback was that co-marketing campaigns perform better than the typical marketing campaign, with one exception. And that one exception was the customer acquisition cost. That they felt like, well, when it comes to customer acquisition costs, partners and ecosystems, we might not be getting, better performance. In fact, we might be getting slightly less performance. And so we kind of dug into that a bit with some of the qualitative interviews we had with, other CMOs. And one of the things that, came out was just, okay, even where, a marketing team believes like, the potential performance of a co-marketing campaign can be higher, the work involved in executing on this, also tends to be higher. That, particularly, it can be challenging enough just to coordinate things within your own company. Coordinating across multiple companies, particularly across multiple large companies, it's challenging. And so I think one of the CMOs, John Miller, is the CMO of Demandbase, kind of referred to this as a planning tax. that got associated with, co-marketing. And so I think that's one of the things that, yeah, is a, like a friction, to doing more of these campaigns. Now, from my perspective, being a MarTech nerd, and fascinated by marketing operations and all those things in particular, I think this is actually a great opportunity because I feel like this is where technology and process and marketing operations, can actually start to help, with systematizing and optimizing how we do ecosystem related marketing motions so that we start to reduce that planning tax associated with co-marketing, in the process be able to get the customer acquisition costs, of that channel, back in line, if not better, than our other options, and then still get all the benefits of like, okay, well, once you actually get the campaign, the program out in the field, its performance, from all the actual, metrics downstream, yeah, keep those high.
Really good insight. Thanks so much. And also, I agree with you that the tech stack for partnerships is and operations in general is just starting to evolve, right? It's a new thing. At the same time, I think both your report and you in this conversation mentioned data a couple of times. And I think, 3/4 of sales leaders use partner data, I should say, to pursue new targets or, improve their sales motion. And I'm sort of curious, how do you think that the data exchange and data sharing between partners is evolving through the context of this report and outside of it?
I think the timing is really good for this. Certainly in marketing more broadly, you could argue that the past 10, 20 years, marketing has been powered tremendously by third-party data, third-party cookies. I mean, the whole ad tech universe was kind of built around that. And for a variety of reasons, mostly associated with, new privacy regulations, compliance, data security, all that sort of the third party side, particularly, third party cookies and whatnot, that's going away. The most natural response to that is like, oh, okay, well, we should really be leaning into more first party data. What do we know from our direct interactions with prospects and customers, which is great. I love it. There's a ton of data there to mine that we've only begun to, operationalize in most companies. But to take one step further and be like, well, wait a second, we've got this ecosystem and there's all these other companies that we're connected to that collectively influence the same mutual buyer. Boy, if we start to exchange, data between us, does this open up ability to do, much more targeted, engagements? And again, this doesn't have to be like, very respectful of data privacy regulations. A lot of times it doesn't have to be anything around like personal data, like individual contacts, anything like that. Even just being able to align on accounts, of like, oh, which companies are you dealing with? Which ones are we dealing with? Where are there overlaps? Are there ways we can then, jointly go to market, to offer those, those prospects and customers, more integrated solutions. Boy, that just unlocks a tremendous amount of possibilities. But again, like this is all very new. I mean, some of the technologies, the data clean room and the, like partnership account mapping tools and whatnot, they've arguably only been in market here like a few years. And so people are just starting to figure out like, okay, can we use this and how do we use it and how do we do it effectively? But I think it has a tremendous amount of promise, on the road ahead, of how we can, leverage second party data, as a much better source of data, than the third party data of the olden days.
In context with data, I think it would be interesting to talk about it. So the last year when we had a conversation, we discussed almost like crazy, forecasts by IDC, crazy in a little bit over the top forecast by IDC that there's going to be 500 million apps by the end of 2023, the sort of in half a year from now. And it sounded almost like completely improbable, right? I mean, it sounded, too much. And right now, I think we are living with AI for, let's say, 7-8 months, right? Maybe like 6 months at scale, and all of a sudden this forecast and the amount of data that exists, or like forecasted to be there, feels just difficult to intuit even, right? So I'm curious, how do you think AI will change how companies collaborate, how it will change partnerships, and how it will change all this ecosystem dynamic?
Yeah, well, on that IDC report, I mean, one of the things, again, it was an important aspect is when they were talking about 500 million apps in the cloud, um, the vast, vast majority of those are going to be like custom one-off app stuff that individual companies are doing or whatnot. So like the commercial app universe, I think is still quite large. I mean, I know for a fact, just based on G2, the review site, they have over 100,000, SaaS products just in their database alone. So it's large, but yeah, when you start getting into all these individual custom apps that people are building, particularly now leveraging all these no code and low code tools, yeah, I think the idea of there being 500 million apps, however you kind of want to define app, floating around out in the cloud, I don't know, I think that's pretty reasonable. My sense is AI is only going to accelerate that. In fact, I mean, directly one of the areas we've seen in AI was this whole concept of the co-pilots, that are going to make it easier for more people to build software. It's going to make it easier for existing software engineers to build software faster, better. In fact, it has the potential to explode the number of apps. Again, the boundary of what you consider an app to be, maybe a bit of a philosophical debate, but it's likely to expand the universe of apps to be so many that at some level I almost wonder if it starts to fall into the background. Like there was a time, for instance, like when we counted the number of websites in the world, and that somehow seemed like, a big thing. How many websites are there? And now there's so many billions of websites. That's like, we just don't even think about the count. It's just become so embedded. Well, of course, we work with any website we want anytime we need it. And if we want to bring one up ourselves, we do that, and that's fine. I think that's kind of where we're ending up with software. There's just so much software that permeates every facet of what we do, that somehow counting apps I think just doesn't become as interesting anymore, and I'm sort of eager for us to, sort of get beyond that level of it and be like, no, I mean, the number of apps ultimately doesn't matter. What matters is your business orchestrated? How is your performance? Are you executing the things you want to do? And the different elements of technology that you pull together to make that happen. I mean, it's important, but I don't think the count is going to be something that people talk as much about in the future that they have in the past. Just my opinion.
Such a great point that we will stop counting, especially all the small apps, and probably, I mean, no code apps obviously, are not like a real products at scale, right? And then AI will start like writing. I mean, it is already writing pieces of code pretty well, I should say. I mean, not for maybe production, but for debugging and kind of later improvements. But I'm still sort of wondering, sort of directionally, you mentioned Copilot, and HubSpot launched its own AI Copilot for sales and marketing, which makes a lot of sense. I think you have treasure trove of data and knowledge from customers that you can leverage, and it's it's a great place, great kind of start of the product. I'm curious, sort of directionally, how do you think software markets may be evolving with this explosion of data and AI, and also various partnerships?
Well, I think it's going to be a golden age for, partnerships. And, of course, you're talking to a partnerships guy, so yeah, let's assume I'm a little bit optimistically biased there. But, still, like, just think about it. Just pick the data lens for now, because a lot of people are talking about this is, when you look at this AI revolution that was happening right now, don't get me wrong, the AI engines themselves are very remarkable. but it's becoming very clear that the real competitive advantage is going to be, well, what data, do you feed into the engine? And I think everyone's starting to take stock of like, okay, first of all, what is their own proprietary data? What data sets do they uniquely have in their business, and how might they leverage that? But I think you also start to think like, okay, well, this is our unique data set. Who are the other companies that have their unique data sets? And as we start to combine them together in interesting ways, what sort of possibilities does that open up? Because, it's not that this data is new per se, it's always been around, but let's face it, like when you start getting a lot of data at scale and you're trying to pull data at scale, oh my goodness, within your own organization is usually challenging, but you start thinking about like, yeah, combining and pulling data sets from multiple companies. Even if in theory, there's amazing opportunity, there's gold to be found there, just the logistical process of doing it and then mining it and understanding it and how do we leverage it just was incredibly expensive. And I think one of the things that's so amazing about, some of this current AI technology is it's just so good at being able to absorb this data, through the embeddings, like understand the relationships, to these things. And then thanks now to the natural language, interface, like you just ask your questions and it's able to come back with like these answers and insights from data that, oh my goodness, if you would have needed like a personal team of like data scientists at your beck and call, to get access to the sort of democratized data insight that I think is going to become available to companies. And yeah, this then comes back to partnerships. Like, okay, you should be looking to your partnerships team to how do we grow our data partnerships to really be able to take advantage of this.
I've been following you for years, and I remember reading your book, number of years ago, and thinking, yeah, that's marketing landscape is getting like bigger and bigger, and it's getting like crazier and crazier. And I think right now we are in the stage when we realize that that was kind of nothing comparing with what we expect to see in the next 5 to 10 years maybe. So just to wrap this conversation up, I think sort of my last question would be, what are you excited about looking in the next year?
Oh boy, what am I not excited about? I mean, I really do feel, several people have made this remark, including Bill Gates, that this AI moment that's happening right now feels as revolutionary as the internet, as the PC. Like it's really going to change how we do business, like what we're capable of doing, how we work, both individually, as companies, as partner ecosystems. And so, man, what an incredibly exciting time. I'll confess, a hard time. Like it's very hard to have the crystal ball at the stage we're at right now and predict what is this going to look like a year or two from now, because things are like just changing so fast. I mean, the innovations are happening at a rate that, yeah, like you could spend all day just trying to catch up on like what was, released yesterday. So it's hard to predict, but I do feel like it is going to be a very different world over these next 2 years. And so for anyone who's, yeah, basically it's an opportunity, for companies, for individual careers, for people to like seize this new wave and really help lead us to, yeah, what the next level of this is all going to look like. So, a very exciting time to be alive and, be working in this stuff.
How AI will be applied to partnership? Have you had a chance to think about it?
First and foremost, like we'll look for data partnerships, but I also think, just in managing partnerships, we'll be able to leverage data a lot more effectively. I think as you start to look at AI agents from the buyer perspective, being able to like help facilitate how buyers get stuff. Like it's AI isn't just for sellers, right? It's AI is going to be, incredibly impactful for buyers as well too. And so you start to think about like, okay, as we start to, it's not just humans interacting with humans, but it's also these AI agents interacting with humans, or AI agents interacting with each other, buyer agents interacting with seller agents. I know this sounds a little like science fiction, but it's just not that far off at this point. I think that's going to be really interesting, because now you start thinking about like, oh, well, what does that mean from an ecosystem perspective and ecosystem management perspective? Like, my agents, my partners' agents, my customers' agents, they all become part of the mix. And I think that's going to open up some like incredibly creative new ways of like, yeah, how do we serve these new channels and these new touch points?
This probably will also make companies much more transparent, right? And number of touch points that they will have with external parties like customers and partners will probably explode as well. And this will probably will require like additional skill set and so on. Look, thank you so much. It's been great conversation. It's really good to have you back, and thank you so much for not only leading marketing technology, but now leading partnerships into the new age as well. So I look forward to having another conversation maybe in a couple of months, so next year, and discussing all the crazy stuff that's going on in technology, but sort of crazy in sort of exciting way. Thanks so much, Scott. It's been great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me back, Roman. But looking forward to the road ahead.